The wind carried dust across the open plain, whispering through the dry grass like an old secret that never died. Evening was settling in over Cedar Hollow, that quiet stretch of land tucked between the rolling hills of Montana Territory, where the sunsets came wide and the silences came deeper. Smoke from chimneys coiled lazily into the cooling air, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to a moon not yet risen. The ranch sat on the edge of that hollow, a weather-beaten house, a half-mended fence and acres of pasture browned by summer's drought. Inside the barn, where the scent of hay and old timber lingered, a single lantern burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to move with the flicker of flame. That's where he stood, Eli, the rancher. Tall, worn by years of hard labor, his hands were calloused from rope and rain, his face marked by sun and grit. He wasn't a man who scared easy, but that night, something about the quiet felt wrong. He'd come back late from the north field, checking on the horses after hearing a strange noise, a crack of wood, maybe a gate swinging open when it shouldn't. At first he thought it might have been the wind, but as he stepped inside, the lantern hanging by the door swung once, slow and steady, as if touched by an unseen hand. "Who's there?" he called, voice low and firm. For a moment, nothing, just the creak of the barn boards and the faint rustle of straw. Then came a sound, a quick intake of breath, sharp and human. Eli's hand went to his side where his revolver usually sat, though he hadn't worn it since spring branding ended. "Show yourself," he said again. From behind the hay bales, a figure moved, slender, careful. The light caught her face first, dust-streaked, frightened, and young. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair tangled from travel. She froze at the sight of him, as if unsure whether to run or beg. "Please," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Don't send me back out there," Eli frowned. "You shouldn't be here. Folks don't just wander into other people's barns after dark." "I didn't mean no harm," she whispered. "I just needed a place to rest. I'll be gone by dawn." The rancher studied her for a long moment. She wasn't from Cedar Hollow, that much was clear. Her clothes were city-stitched, though worn thin, and her accent wasn't from around these parts. Something about the way she kept glancing toward the door told him she was running, from something or someone. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Clara." He nodded slightly, though the name felt like a lie. He wasn't about to press her. "You can stay till morning," he said finally, "but you'll have to tell me what brought you this far from town. Folks out here don't take kindly to trespassers." She looked down, her hands trembling as she clutched the fabric of her sleeve. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she murmured. "Try me." For a long stretch, only the wind spoke between them. The lantern crackled. Somewhere in the rafters a swallow stirred. Then she lifted her head, her eyes shining with something caught between fear and desperation. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to," she said. "And now, they're after me." Eli's brow tightened. "Who's they?" Before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats thundered faintly from beyond the ridge, distant but drawing closer. She turned toward the open door, her face pale. "They found me." Eli moved toward the barn doors, peering through a slit in the boards. Dust rose on the far end of the trail, 3 riders, dark silhouettes against the dying light. Whoever they were, they rode hard and fast, and they weren't coming for a friendly visit. "You bring trouble here, girl?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, tears glinting. "I didn't have a choice, please. Just let me stay hidden till they pass." Eli considered the situation, the old instincts of caution tugging at him. He'd seen his share of trouble in his younger years. Land disputes, cattle thieves, men who solved everything with bullets and whiskey. But there was something about the look in her eyes that pulled at him, something that didn't speak of deceit. He sighed, then motioned toward the corner. "Get behind those crates. Don't make a sound." She obeyed without a word, crouching low as the hoofbeats grew louder. Moments later, the riders reached the yard. The lead horse snorted, and a gruff voice called out, "Evening, rancher!" Eli stepped out onto the porch, hands loose at his sides, face unreadable. "Evening," he replied. "Seen a young woman pass through here?" the man asked. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark duster that hid his holster but not the shape of the gun beneath it. His eyes glinted under the brim of his hat. "About this tall, traveling alone." Eli shook his head slowly. "Ain't seen nobody cross this way since last week." "You lose someone?" The man spat into the dirt. "She's wanted for questioning. Best if you don't get in the middle of it." "Can't get in the middle of what I don't know," Eli said evenly. For a moment, the man just stared at him. Then he gave a short nod and turned his horse. "If she comes by, you let us know. Wouldn't want you caught in something that ain't yours." Eli watched them ride off, their silhouettes shrinking into the fading dusk until the dust settled back to stillness. Only then did he return to the barn. Clara was still there, crouched low, eyes wide and waiting. "They gone?" she asked. "For now." She let out a trembling breath and stood, brushing hay from her skirt. The lantern's glow softened her face, and Eli could see now that she wasn't just scared. She was exhausted, worn thin from running. He noticed the scrape along her arm, the dried blood near her wrist. "You need to clean that up," he said quietly. "I'll be fine," she replied. Though her voice wavered, he turned to fetch some water from the bucket by the door. But when he looked back, she was staring at something behind him, her expression frozen. Lips parted in shock. "Wait," she whispered. "I take it off." Eli froze, confused, following her gaze. She wasn't looking at him, but at something hanging on the wall. A worn, leather-bound board with carved markings he hadn't touched in years. His father had made it, back before the ranch was his. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Her hands shook as she reached for the board, the lantern light trembling with her movement. "This symbol," she said softly, tracing the faint engraving with her fingertip. "Where did you get this?" Eli frowned. "Been here since I was a boy." "Why?" Clara's breath hitched. "Because the men looking for me, they wear the same mark." The words hung heavy between them. For a long second, neither moved. The air inside the barn seemed to tighten, as if the walls themselves were listening. Eli's mind spun. That board, that mark, it was supposed to be nothing more than a keepsake, a relic of old family days. But now, staring at her pale face, he felt something stir deep inside him, something long buried under years of quiet living. Before he could speak, the horses outside began to snort and stamp, their unease rising again. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of voices. Closer this time. Clara turned to him, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "They didn't leave," she whispered. "They circled back." Eli reached for the rifle by the door, his pulse steady but cold. He didn't know what kind of trouble had found its way to his barn that night, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, nothing about Cedar Hollow would ever be the same again. And as the hoofbeats drew near, the lantern flickered once more, then went out. The wind outside grew rougher, carrying with it the dry scent of dirt and something faintly metallic, like iron and rain before a storm. Eli stood in the dark barn, hand tight around the rifle, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. Clara's breathing came quick and uneven beside him, her silhouette barely visible against the pale outline of the open door. Somewhere out there, hooves moved in a slow circle, deliberate and heavy. The riders hadn't gone far. They were waiting. Eli motioned for her to stay quiet, then stepped softly to the side window and peered through a slit in the wood. The moon had risen, casting a faint silver sheen across the yard. 3 shapes were there, still as fence posts, their horses restless beneath them. One of the men dismounted, his boots crunching softly in the dust as he walked toward the house. He wasn't holding a weapon in sight, but the way he moved, calm, sure, told Eli he didn't need to show one. Clara's whisper barely rose above the wind. "They know." "Not yet," Eli murmured back. "But they will if we don't stay still." He waited, heart thudding slow but strong, until the sound of footsteps drifted away toward the porch. The boards creaked under the man's weight, then silence. A long minute passed before a voice called out again. "Rancher!" "We just want to talk." Eli didn't move. The words were smooth, practiced, the kind used by men who are good at lying. He knew that kind too well. He stayed quiet, letting the night carry on its whisper. Then came another sound, a faint click, metallic and sharp. Clara flinched. The man had cocked his revolver. "I ain't gonna ask twice," the voice said, harder now. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Eli stepped back from the window. He knew if he answered, they'd know he was still here. But if he didn't, they might start searching. He glanced at Clara, who stood frozen, her hands pressed to her mouth. She looked like someone who'd been running for days, and maybe she had. Her clothes were still damp with sweat and dirt from the road. He leaned close, his voice low. "You been running long?" She nodded. "Since Abner's Creek. 2 days, maybe 3. I lost count after sundown yesterday. Why were you there?" Her eyes darted toward the barn door as if she feared the question more than the riders. "I was working. At the post station. I used to sort the letters and keep the records. And these men? She hesitated, then whispered, They're not lawmen if that's what you're thinking. They're worse. They call themselves the Circle. They move around from town to town, take what they want. Land, money, sometimes people. I didn't know what they were until it was too late. Eli frowned, the name stirring something in him. The Circle. He hadn't heard that in years. Maybe since the war. Maybe before. What did you see? He asked. She swallowed hard. A list. Names and land plots. They had records of places they meant to take. Cedar Hollow was on it. Eli stared at her in the dim light, his jaw tightening. This ranch? She nodded. And more. The whole valley. Outside, the sound of the horses shifted again. The men were dismounting now, their boots sinking into the dirt as they fanned out. One of them lit a lantern, its glow creeping across the yard like a slow-moving snake. They're spreading, Eli muttered. Looking for tracks. He blew out the small barn lantern completely, plunging them into darkness. Clara's fingers clutched at her skirt, trembling. He turned to her. Listen to me, he said quietly. There's a tunnel under the back of this barn, old storage dug into the hill. My father built it when folks were still fighting over land around here. You can hide down there till I send them off. Her eyes widened. What about you? I'll handle them. Before she could argue, a voice called again from outside. Eli Ward, we know you're in there. Eli's heart thumped once hard. They knew his name. How do they know you? Clara whispered. I don't know, he said, though the unease in his voice betrayed the lie. He grabbed her arm gently. Go, now. She hesitated, fear and confusion in her eyes, but did as he said, slipping through the small wooden door at the back of the barn that led down a narrow, earthen passage. When the door shut behind her, Eli turned toward the front, squared his shoulders, and stepped out. The three men were waiting in the moonlight, their faces half hidden under wide-brimmed hats. The one in the middle, tall, gray-bearded, with a scar running from his temple to his chin, grinned when he saw him. There he is, the man said. Didn't think you'd leave us standing out here all night. Eli said nothing, just kept his rifle low but ready. What's your business? He asked. We told you, the gray-bearded man said. We're looking for a runaway. She took something that belongs to us. I already told you, Eli said evenly. Nobody's come through here. The man chuckled. That so? Strange then that we found footprints leading straight into your yard. Eli's gaze flicked toward the dirt. The prints weren't hers. They were his, from when he'd walked to the barn earlier. The man took a slow step forward. Now, I don't want no trouble, Ward. We just want the girl. You hand her over and we'll be gone before the night's through. And if I don't? The man's smile faded. Then this place burns before sunrise. The two others shifted behind him, hands near their holsters. The air turned heavy, the kind of stillness that came right before gunfire. But Eli didn't move. He'd lived through enough fights to know when one could still be avoided. You got 5 minutes, the man said, then motioned to his men. They turned back toward their horses but stayed close, waiting. Eli didn't breathe until they were far enough away that their words faded into low murmurs. He stepped back into the barn and pulled the back door open. Clara was crouched in the shadows, her face pale. What did they say? They're not leaving without you. She shook her head, whispering, I didn't steal anything. I swear it, but I found out what they were doing. They think I still have the ledger. What ledger? The one with all their names. All the deals they made. If it gets out, every rancher in this valley would know who's been buying up their land. They'd be ruined. Eli's jaw tightened. And they think you have it. I left it behind when I ran. I didn't even have time to pack a bag. The weight of her words hung in the air. Eli thought about the mark on that old board, the one she'd recognized. His father had carved it years ago, saying it came from an old cattle brand used by men he once worked for. Maybe that was the same circle she spoke of. Maybe his father had known more than he ever said. He looked out at the horizon, where a faint glow of firelight flickered from the men's camp. You said they were taking land. How? By tricking folks into debt, she said. They'd lend money for supplies, then forge papers saying the land was collateral. Once the ranchers couldn't pay, they'd send men to collect. Sometimes the ranchers disappeared before they could fight back. Eli exhaled slowly, his mind working. And now they're trying to do the same here. She nodded. Cedar Hollow's next. The night deepened, thick with the smell of smoke from their campfire. Eli sat down on an overturned crate, staring at the rifle resting across his knees. The silence between them stretched long, broken only by the sound of the wind through the slats. After a while, Clara spoke again. "You don't believe me." "I didn't say that," he replied. "But you think I brought danger to your door." He looked up at her, his eyes steady. "You didn't bring it." "It was already here." For a moment, neither spoke. Then a noise broke the quiet, soft footsteps outside, then the faint creak of a hinge. Eli rose at once, motioning her back. He moved toward the side of the barn and peered out through a crack. The gray-bearded man stood again by the porch, lantern raised high. But this time he wasn't looking for tracks. He was staring straight at the barn. Eli's pulse kicked hard. The man's voice came low, steady, and certain. "You can't hide her, Ward. The circle always finds what belongs to it." Then, as if to prove his point, he lifted something from his pocket, a small, weathered piece of leather. Eli's breath caught. It was identical to the board that hung inside the barn. The same mark. Clara stepped forward behind him, whispering, "That's their brand." Eli turned toward her. "And it used to be my father's." The two of them stared at each other, realization dawning slow and cold. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the barn doors like bones. The riders were no longer just hunting Clara. They were here for something older, something buried deep in the history of Cedar Hollow, something that tied Eli's family to the circle long before either of them had been born. And as the first flicker of dawn touched the edge of the sky, Eli knew the night had only just begun. The morning came slow, dragging a pale light over the hollow. Mist clung to the ground, curling around fence posts and the low hills like breath from something sleeping beneath the earth. The circle riders were still out there. Eli could feel it before he saw them. A man learns to read the quiet. Birds weren't singing. The horses hadn't settled. Even the wind seemed to wait for what might happen next. Inside the barn, Clara sat near the open stall door, wrapped in one of Eli's old coats. Her eyes were rimmed red from a night without sleep. Eli stood by the workbench, sharpening his knife more for the sound of it than the use. The scrape of steel against stone filled the silence. "They won't stop," she said finally, her voice rough. "They'll come again, I know. They'll burn this place if they have to." Eli looked up, his expression unreadable. They can try. He'd lived through hard winters, broken droughts, and worse men. But something about this was different. The circle wasn't just after her. They had a reason for wanting Cedar Hollow. That old mark, his father's mark, ran through his mind like a shadow that refused to leave. He set the knife down. "You said they had a ledger, records of deals. You sure it listed this valley?" "I saw the pages myself," she said. "They had lines drawn over every ranch north of the river. This place was marked twice." Eli turned toward the window. Beyond the fence, the grass shimmered under the thin light. Somewhere out there, men were waiting. "Then it's not just about you," he said. "It's about land," Clara nodded slowly. "And power." A long silence stretched between them. Then Eli walked to the door and opened it just enough to let in the morning air. He saw movement by the old oak tree, one of the riders standing watch. They weren't hiding. They wanted him to see them. "They're watching the ranch," he muttered. Clara moved closer, clutching the coat tighter. "What will you do?" He didn't answer right away. His father's words came back to him, words from years ago. A man can lose his cattle, his land, and still live, but once he gives up his ground, he's already dead. Eli stepped outside, the door creaking behind him. He walked to the porch, boots stirring dust, and looked toward the distant rider. The man didn't move, just watched. For a moment, the world seemed caught between breaths. Then Eli turned and went back inside. "They'll be waiting for me to make a move," he said. "So I won't," Clara frowned. "You're just going to stay here?" "For now, but I'll need to know what they're really after." She hesitated, then reached into her satchel, the only thing she'd carried when she came. From it, she pulled a folded piece of parchment, worn and torn at the edges. "I found this before I left the station. It's not the ledger, but it's part of it. I thought it might help." Eli took it carefully. The paper was covered in rough ink, a list of names and land coordinates. Some had marks beside them, small circles drawn by hand. Near the bottom, he saw one name written darker than the rest. "Ward," he said quietly. "That's yours, isn't it?" Clara asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, my father's name before mine." "Then they were after your family long before this." Eli folded the paper and slid it into his coat. His jaw set tight. "If my father was tied to them, there's only one man left who'd know how." "Who?" "Old Ben Callahan," he said. "He worked this land before I did. Helped my father build the barn. He's been living up in town since he lost his leg, but if anyone remembers the truth about that brand, it's him. Clara looked uneasy. You mean to ride into town with them watching? Not in daylight, Eli said. We'll wait for dusk. They can't watch both roads once the light drops. Through the rest of the day, tension hung over the ranch like a storm that refused to break. Clara helped feed the horses, her hands shaking only when she thought he wasn't looking. She spoke little, but every so often Eli caught her staring toward the horizon as if expecting to see more riders. By late afternoon, the air grew heavy and still. Eli saddled 2 horses quietly, packing only what they could carry, a rifle, water, and the paper she'd brought. When the sky began to turn gold, they rode out the back way, through the old trail that wound behind the ridge. As they rode, Clara finally spoke. Did you ever wonder why your father used their brand? Eli's grip tightened on the reins. He said it came from a cattle drive down south. A mark of men who helped him once. You believed him? He didn't answer. Truth was, he never really thought about it. His father had been a quiet man, hard, fair, and full of secrets. The kind of man who'd rather bury the past than explain it. The ride to town took an hour, maybe 2. The sun was dipping low when they reached the edge of Mill Creek, a small settlement of about 20 buildings and one dusty main road. The blacksmith's forge glowed at the far end, and the faint sound of a piano drifted from the saloon. Eli led the horses down the side alley behind the general store, out of sight. Stay close, he said. Ben's place is just past the old well. Clara nodded, her eyes scanning every shadow. The closer they got, the more uneasy she looked. Ben Callahan's shack sat behind the tannery, a squat wooden thing that leaned like it had grown tired of standing. Eli knocked once on the door, and after a long pause, a voice called out, Who's there? It's Eli Ward. There was a scrape, a shuffle, and then the door creaked open. Ben stood there, older than Eli remembered, his beard white and his left leg replaced with a wooden one. He squinted, then grinned faintly. Well, I'll be. Thought you'd forgotten old Ben. Never could, Eli said. Ben's eyes drifted past him to Clara. And who's this? Someone in trouble, Eli replied. We don't have much time, Ben. I need to ask you something about my father. Ben motioned them inside. The room was small, filled with the smell of oil and tobacco. Maps and papers lay scattered across the table, yellowed from age. What's this about? Ben asked. Eli unfolded the parchment and placed it on the table. You ever seen this mark before? Ben leaned close, his brow furrowing as he traced the circle-shaped brand drawn on the page. His face darkened. Where'd you get this? It's been showing up on my land, Eli said. And these men, the circle, they're using it. Clara says they've been taking over ranches across the valley. Ben sank back into his chair, the wood creaking. Then it's worse than I thought. What do you mean? Ben rubbed his temples. Your father didn't make that brand, Eli. He inherited it. The circle wasn't just some gang, it was a syndicate. Land traders, bankers, ranchers. They started out after the war, buying up everything they could. But when your father realized what they were doing, how they were cheating folks, he tried to pull out. Eli frowned. So why keep the mark? Ben sighed. To protect you. They let him keep the land if he promised silence. But when he died, they must have decided the deal was over. Clara stared at the old man. Then they're coming back to claim it. Ben nodded grimly. And they won't stop till they do. Outside, a horse whinnied sharply, followed by the distant clatter of hooves. Eli's hand went to his rifle. They followed us, Clara whispered. Ben stood, his old hand shaking slightly. There's a back way through the tannery yard. Go now, Eli hesitated. You come with us. Ben shook his head. I can't run, son. But I'll slow them down. Eli's eyes met his, the weight of unspoken thanks passing between them. Then he grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward the rear door. As they slipped out the back, voices rose near the front of the shack. Rough, demanding. Clara glanced over her shoulder, her face pale in the fading light. They darted behind the tannery, following the narrow path that led toward the creek. The smell of leather and smoke filled the air. When they reached the edge of the hill, Eli stopped, turning to look back. Flames flickered from Ben's shack. They set it on fire, Clara whispered. Eli's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. They mounted the horses and rode hard into the dark, the sound of gunfire cracking behind them. The night swallowed them whole, the wind tearing at their coats as they raced toward the hills. When they finally slowed, the ranch lay far behind, and Mill Creek was a burning glow on the horizon. Eli dismounted and looked up at the stars, cold, distant, and silent. Clara stood beside him, shaking from exhaustion. "What now?" she asked. He looked east toward the mountains. "Now we find out just how deep this circle goes." The wind carried the faint echo of hoofbeats again. Many this time, not 3. The circle wasn't done. They were coming in force, and as Eli loaded his rifle, the old mark on his barn door burned in his mind like a brand coming alive once more. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged and shadowed, cutting through the last of the evening light like the teeth of some giant creature. Eli guided the horses along the narrow ridge trail, every step careful against loose stones. Clara rode close behind, silent except for the occasional shiver when the wind whipped across her face. The creek below hissed faintly through the rocks, carrying the scent of wet earth and smoke from the burning town behind them. "They'll be after us all night," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. Eli didn't answer at once. He didn't need to. He could feel it, the presence of them even from this distance. The circle didn't just hunt with eyes. They hunted with knowledge, instinct, and fear. The closer they got to the mountains, the tighter the pressure became, like a fist slowly closing around the valley. "We need to find a place to rest," he said finally. "Somewhere hidden. Somewhere they can't see." Clara shook her head. "If we stop, they'll catch us. They won't give up." "Then we don't stop long," Eli said. "A half hour, not more. We keep moving till we know the land won't give us away." The trail twisted through pines, their needles sharp underfoot, and the horses' hooves sank into the soft soil. From the ridge, Eli could see a small plateau ahead, a natural hollow shielded on 3 sides by rock and scrub. He slowed the horses there, scanning for any signs of movement. Nothing, only the wind through the trees. They dismounted and led the animals to a flat area behind boulders, tying them to scrub branches. Clara leaned against a rock, exhausted, her hands trembling as she pulled at the straps of her coat. Eli knelt nearby, checking his rifle. Every shot counted now. Every misstep could be their last. "Tell me more," he said. "About the ledger. How far did it go?" Clara's lips pressed tight. It had names, land deeds, everything the circle had touched in the last 10 years. They moved from one settlement to the next, buying, taking, threatening. Whoever stood in the way either left or disappeared. "I only saw the portion that concerned this valley." Eli studied her face in the dim light. Fear and determination warred across it. She wasn't just running blindly. She'd been trying to stop them. And this valley. They want it all? Yes, every ranch. Cedar Hollow first. Then Mill Creek. Then any place in between that's valuable. Eli's jaw tightened. "Then we can't just hide. Not forever. We need to know what they're planning next." She swallowed hard. "I think they're waiting for the ledger to surface again. They'll track anyone carrying pieces of it. That's why I ran." The night pressed close and the wind carried whispers of distant hooves. Eli's ears caught the faint scrape of rocks behind them. He spun toward the sound, rifle ready. Clara froze. "Someone's coming," she whispered. From the shadows emerged a lone figure, hunched and cautious. Eli raised his voice. "Identify yourself." The figure stopped, hands raised. A soft voice answered. "It's me. Jonas, friend of Ben Callahan." Relief washed over them, though brief. Jonas was a young man from Mill Creek who had helped Ben deliver supplies and keep watch on the circle. "They're closing in," he said quickly. "Ben's burned his shack down, slowed them, but they've split up. Some are heading this way. Others went around the valley to cut off escape routes." Clara's eyes widened. "So we're trapped?" Eli shook his head. "Not trapped, surrounded. There's a difference." He glanced toward the mountains. "We'll use the ridges. They won't know every trail." Jonas looked uneasy. "Even so, they'll be organized. They've got men who've done this before. I've seen them. They're fast, brutal, and clever. One mistake?" Eli nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we moved tonight." They spent the next hour preparing, sharpening knives, checking rifles, spreading blankets for concealment. Clara watched silently, her hands occasionally brushing the paper Jonas had brought from Ben. Every crease, every mark felt like a map of danger. "You ever wonder why your father's mark was so important?" Clara asked quietly. "Why the circle keeps coming back to it?" Eli stared into the fire Jonas had built for warmth. "Because it meant he stood against them. Because it symbolized land they couldn't control. Thy father's choices. They left a trail they can't ignore." Clara shivered. "And now you're in it." Eli didn't answer. He only looked at the shadows stretching across the rocks. The night was deepening. Every sound, every breeze carried a threat. Hours passed, and they moved along the ridge, careful to stay out of sight. Jonas led them, whispering directions. marking paths that even the circle's sharpest trackers would struggle to follow. The horses stumbled occasionally over roots and loose stones, and Clara's breath came ragged from exhaustion. Yet the fear that the circle was near kept her moving, kept Eli's eyes sharp. Finally, they reached a hidden cave along the mountain face, shallow but dry. The entrance was well concealed by a wall of boulders and pine brush. Eli led the horses in, then turned to Clara and Jonas. "This is as far as we go tonight," he said. "We rest, we plan. We can't keep running forever." Inside, the cave was dark, the only light coming from a small lantern Jonas had brought. They huddled close, exhaustion pressing in. Outside, the wind rattled the pines like whispers from the valley below. Clara finally broke the silence. "Do you think we can stop them?" Eli didn't answer right away. He traced the mark on the paper with his finger. "I don't know yet. But if we don't try, the valley's done. Every rancher, every family, gone." The sound of distant hooves echoed faintly, and the three of them froze. The circle was near. They could be watching the entrance, waiting, calculating. Eli's pulse quickened. He crouched near the entrance, rifle ready. "They're smarter than any men I've faced," Jonas whispered. "They don't just chase. They predict. They set traps. One wrong step," Eli nodded. "Then we don't step wrong." The night dragged on, tension coiling tighter with every passing minute. Eli and Jonas took turns watching the cave entrance while Clara tried to rest. Every shadow outside seemed to grow larger, every rustle of brush a potential threat. The paper with the circle's ledger details lay open on a flat rock, a map of the enemy's reach, every line and mark a symbol of danger. Hours later, movement came. From the ridge above, a figure slipped down silently, a lone rider following the trail of the mountains. Eli spotted the glint of a hat brim and a rifle. The circle had found them. "They're scouting," he whispered. "We're not alone." Clara's eyes widened. "Then what do we do?" Eli looked at Jonas. "We wait. We see what they want. We don't give them a reason to act too soon." The rider circled the cave entrance slowly, pausing at points to peer in. Each time Eli held his breath, counting seconds that felt like hours. The circle wasn't reckless. They moved with patience, with purpose. One wrong move, one careless word, and it could all be over. As dawn began to touch the sky, painting it faintly orange, the rider finally moved away. But the quiet that followed wasn't relief. It was the calm before the storm. Eli knew more were coming, that the main force of the circle had likely split into groups, surrounding the valley, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Clara, pale and trembling, finally whispered, "They'll come for us in numbers, won't they?" Eli didn't answer immediately. He knelt near the ledger. "They'll come," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we'll give them what they want. Not yet." The tension in the cave pressed heavier. Every plan they made, every step they took, was a gamble against men who had no mercy and no hesitation. The circle had been hunting long before them, and the valley itself seemed to know their presence, holding its breath along with the three of them. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying distant voices and the faint sound of hooves on stone. The circle was closing in. They weren't just hunters, they were predators. And the moment of confrontation, when it would all come to a head, was near. Eli tightened his grip on the rifle, feeling the weight of the coming night settle over him. Clara pressed close and Jonas adjusted the lantern to give them the faintest light. They waited, hearts pounding, senses stretched taut. Every creak of the rocks, every whisper of the wind was a signal. Every sound could be the first shot fired, and in the distance the valley below remained quiet, almost too quiet, as if it too knew the coming storm. The circle was out there, moving, calculating, waiting for the moment they could strike. Eli's eyes narrowed, his mind running through every possibility. This night would change everything. The ledger, the valley, the ranch, nothing would remain the same. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving shadows thick and dark, he realized the fight ahead would demand everything they had. Courage, wit, and a resolve they weren't yet sure they could hold. The valley held its breath, and so did they. The night hung heavy over the mountains, the wind now carrying only the soft rustle of pine needles and the faint trickle of the creek below. Eli crouched near the mouth of the cave, rifle ready, but the sounds of pursuit had faded. The circle had been cautious, precise, but they had underestimated the terrain, underestimated the land and the man who knew it as well as he knew his own hands. The valley, wide and empty beyond the ridges, seemed almost to exhale, as if relief itself had begun to creep back into the hollow. Clara sat beside the fire they had managed to spark, her hands still trembling, but the tension in her shoulders was slowly easing. Jonas leaned against a boulder, eyelids heavy with exhaustion, but his grip never left the lantern. The three of them were alive. That alone was a victory after hours of uncertainty, hours in which every snap of a branch and distant shadow had felt like doom. Eli lowered his rifle, resting it across his knees. His thoughts drifted back to the ledger, the paper she had carried through fire, dust, and fear. It was safe now, tucked securely in a leather satchel that Jonas held. The details, the names, the land deals, they would no longer be secrets the Circle could use to terrorize the valley. That weight, which had pressed on Clara so heavily, was slowly lifting. "You think they'll come back?" Clara asked quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice carried both curiosity and lingering fear. Eli shook his head slowly. "Maybe, but they won't find easy prey here again. We've made sure of that. They can't take what isn't willing to be given." Clara looked at him, the firelight reflecting in her wide eyes. "You mean Cedar Hollow?" He nodded. "It's still ours. And every other ranch they thought they could claim is safe too, at least for now. People here know what's been happening. The ledger will expose them if anyone dares to challenge it." Jonas finally stirred from his boulder. "You think anyone will believe it?" he asked. "After all they've done?" Eli smiled faintly. "They'll believe it. Fear only works when it's hidden. Once the ledger is out, once folks see the truth, fear loses its power." The three of them remained in the cave a while longer, waiting for the first light of morning to creep over the ridges. The valley below was quiet, as if it too was healing from the terror that had threatened to overrun it. Eli studied the horizon, the soft blue blending into the edges of gold, and felt the slow return of hope. Finally, he spoke. "We need to get back. Cedar Hollow needs to see we're safe, and the people who stayed behind need to know the Circle can be stopped." Clara's face brightened. "You really think they'll stay away after tonight?" "I know they will," Eli said firmly. "Not forever, maybe, but they'll think twice before they come back. And we've got proof to make sure no one else suffers like this." They mounted their horses again, careful and deliberate, following the ridge down toward the open valley. The land, so familiar yet so threatening over the past days, now felt like an ally. Every rock, every turn of the trail had played a part in their survival. The valley below glimmered in the morning light, Cedar Hollow standing quietly, smoke from chimneys curling upward into the blue sky, a sign that life continued despite everything. As they approached the ranch, Eli felt the weight of responsibility settle back on his shoulders, not the burden of fear, but the burden of guardianship. The ledger was safe, the Circle's reach was diminished, but the memory of the threat, the knowledge of how close they had come to losing everything, would remain. Clara rode beside him, her hands now steady on the reins. She looked around at the familiar landscape, the barns and fences, and for the first time allowed herself a breath that wasn't pulled tight with tension. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Even after everything," Eli glanced at her. "That's why we fight. Not for fear, not for survival alone, but for the land we love, for the people who call it home." Jonas grinned, a small, tired expression. "And for the stories we can tell. The ones that make others ready when the Circle comes sniffing again." They reached the main barn, the horses' hooves clattering softly against the wooden planks of the yard. From a distance they saw neighbors emerging from their homes, cautiously at first, then with relief, realizing the danger had passed. Word of the Circle's defeat, or at least their retreat, had begun to spread. Faces appeared at windows, doors opened slowly, and even the children, sensing the change, crept outside to witness the rancher who had held the line. Eli dismounted, patting the nearest horse, and then turned to Clara. "You need to get inside, rest, eat something. You've carried more than anyone should." She hesitated. "And you?" "I'll be around," he said, his tone calm but steady. "Making sure no one thinks tonight was an accident. Cedar Hollow has to stay strong." Inside the house, warmth welcomed them. Clara sank into a chair near the hearth, the fire now full and bright. The scent of bread and coffee teased her senses, a reminder that life continued, that not every moment was dictated by fear. Jonas spread the ledger on the table, carefully examining each page one last time. Eli leaned against the doorframe, eyes scanning the horizon through the open window. The mountains beyond were quiet now, the wind soft, carrying only the sounds of a waking valley. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The Circle had been beaten back, at least for now, but the memory of their threat would linger. Every rancher, every family would remember the night the valley nearly fell. Clara finally spoke again. Do you think they'll try again? Maybe someday, Eli said, but not like this. Not with the ledger in the right hands and not with us ready. She nodded, finally allowing herself a smile. I can't believe it's over. For now. Eli's gaze softened as he looked at her. Nothing's ever really over. That's why we keep watch, why we remember the past and why we stand for what's ours. Cedar Hollow has survived longer than I've lived, and it will survive after us. That's the way of things. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth and light. Outside, the valley spread wide under the morning sun, golden and untouched. The circle's shadow had been driven back, its plans foiled, but the memory of their threat left a mark as real as any brand. And yet, the people of Cedar Hollow would carry on, stronger for the trials they had endured. Clara leaned back in her chair, exhaustion giving way to a tentative peace. Thank you, she whispered. Eli nodded. You did more than you know. Without you, none of this would have happened. Jonas folded the ledger carefully, tucking it away. We'll make sure everyone sees it, he said. Proof of what's been done, proof that the valley belongs to those who fight for it. Outside, the sun climbed higher, brushing the barns, fences, and fields with warmth. The horses moved in the pens, shaking off the tension of the night. Children's laughter rang faintly from the distance. Life in the valley, fragile but enduring, carried on. Eli finally stepped to the porch, breathing in the air, letting the tension drain slowly from his body. Cedar Hollow was still standing. The land, the people, and the truth had survived the storm. And though the circle remained a distant threat, they had been reminded that this valley, these ranchers, and the families tied to the land would not be cowed. He turned back toward the house, seeing Clara and Jonas through the window, the soft glow of the hearth painting their faces with light and warmth. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a small smile. The ledger was safe. The valley was safe. And for now, the fear had passed. As the morning settled fully over the hollow, Eli realized something deeper than relief. Survival was never about avoiding danger entirely. It was about facing it, enduring it, and protecting the life, land, and people that mattered most. That was the legacy of Cedar Hollow, and now it was a legacy he and those beside him would continue. The wind whispered across the valley, soft and steady, as if carrying a quiet promise. The sun glimmered over the hills. Cedar Hollow had endured. The circle had been challenged, and for the first time in many long nights, the valley breathed freely again, the horizon open and full of possibility. Eli knew one thing for certain. The past would always be part of them. The threat of men like the circle would never vanish completely. But the land, the community, and the courage of those who loved it had triumphed. And that, he thought, was worth every moment of fear, every sleepless night, and every step taken in the dark. For Cedar Hollow, the story continued, not with terror, but with life, resilience, and hope. And in that quiet strength, the valley would endure just as it always had.